Bam.
I'm Dr. Amber Brittain-Hale, and this is the Break It Down Show.
Thanks for coming on the show. We were on recently. We were going to talk more about Ukraine and Russia, and then Donald Trump and his crew went and arrested Nicolas Maduro and his wife in Venezuela. So I thought we had to discuss this because it's current, and there's a lot of inflamed opinions about this. So I thought I'd just open up the floor to you and say, well, what do you think about this? What do we need to know?
Well, correct. Your first point is correct. There's a lot of inflamed opinions on this, and looking across the political spectrum, it's interesting how enthused, optimistic, and delighted Venezuelans are about this circumstance. And then you have kind of your usual protesters out in the street with this Hands Off Venezuela campaign that was up and operational within hours. It was shocking, a shocking amount of speed behind this Hands Off Venezuela movement. And then we have our European colleagues who are just so vigilant all weekend at monitoring the situation and no action to come, which is pretty typical. So what is the consensus that should be taken here? I think breaking it down, your show likes to do, to the core issues, and that is Maduro was an indicted drug trafficker, narco trafficker, and an illegitimate leader of Venezuela. Venezuelans would tell you to be very careful in the words that you use. Don't call him President Maduro. He wasn't the president, and his election was disputed, refuted actually. All this time, you can call him a narco trafficker, you can call him an authoritarian, you can call him a de facto leader, but don't call him President Maduro. So that's number one. What should we call this man? Nicolas Maduro and his wife were black bagged in the middle of the night over Caracas in an operation that went flawlessly. So there's many issues I think that we could talk about. I'm not of a military background, but I do think there's a lot of praise, even from political dissenters, for the flawlessness of the execution of the operation. And I don't know, it's pretty impressive, but my area, diplomacy and digital diplomacy, it seems like the operation and the messaging around what has occurred has all been Maduro was a narco-terrorist. There needs to be transparency around this operation. This is a resurgence of the Monroe Doctrine, or the Dunroe Doctrine, as Trump called it in a press conference, meaning the Western Hemisphere is our near beyond, and it should remain safe, stable, and free from American adversaries. And there's a lot of research that shows Iran's activities in Venezuela, it's Russian activity, Chinese activity. In fact, the Chinese were on the ground at the time of the black bagging, which is shocking and proves their intelligence to be less robust than they would like to think. And also, wasn't Venezuela guarded by Chinese radar technology and some other Russian defensive weapons? And I'm sorry, I thought the whole nation was blacked out, including all computers, lights, and
yeah.
Well, so Nicolas Maduro, as I said, shouldn't be called President Maduro. Venezuelans highly encourage us not to call him that, just call him the de facto leader or authoritarian Maduro. He's standing for arraignment in New York City today, of which I haven't followed those proceedings, but here we are.
Mm-hmm.
So the questions are who's taking over, what's the policy, what's going to happen, and how does everybody feel about it? Take your pick. We can go into any of those.
But so backing up, we've had this problem for a while, and there is a thing where if President Trump does it, it's bad, and if President Biden didn't do it, and I'm not taking sides, it was fine, right? And so it's hard to know like what the reality is. You know, like for how many presidents said, "Hey, we even though we're supposed to, we're not going to move the in Israel, where we set up shop at the embassy." No one ever moved it. He said, I'm gonna, and he did it, and it ended up being not that big of a deal, right? So there's something in when he makes these choices that a lot of the statecraft world would agree with if anybody else would have done it. And his just mere presence is confounding in this thing. So I guess if you want to talk about that a little bit and just you know, I mean, what do you even do? I remember there was a picture of Melania and Donald Trump, and they were holding a baby, and it was a very nice picture, right? Even if you don't like Donald Trump, you go, yeah, whatever. It's a nice photo op. Okay, great. People lost their minds about it, and it just over him holding a baby. And so, I often struggle with when does the politics stop and the policy start?
Oh, this is an excellent question, because if you divorce the man from the policy, um, the reaction is not the same. It's not the same.
Right.
So I'll take an example of some of the European colleagues that are the friendliest or have the strongest rapport with the Trump administration over Venezuela. While they are, quote, monitoring the situation, they also were quick to say Maduro was an illegitimate leader and his election results were never accepted by this polity, whatever it was, Finland or Italy, etc. And then they also have to trot out their rule of law, international law, sort of talking points of international law, because it helps them, their base, maintain this distance, when really, what was Europe ever going to do about Maduro? They have as much uh, challenge with cocaine flooding their shores coming from South America as any other place, but there wasn't an action. So are we looking at the policy? Or are we looking at the politics? And I've seen some excellent cases of, as I mentioned, European leaders quick to say they're monitoring the situation, as well as this is, let's remember international law, but acknowledging the underlying premise, which was this is a narco trafficker who has so destabilized Venezuela and the hemisphere. This is problematic. So if you want to tackle this like a research experiment, take a look at Democrats as an example who were all about Venezuela and the freedoms of Venezuela, and we need to get Maduro out. Trump's not doing anything about it in Trump one. Go back to their tweets and their statements of how feckless they thought Donald Trump was on Maduro. And then we have Biden, who did zero point 0.0 things. And then these same Democrats are out today claiming Trump is lawless and, violating every norm and burning diplomacy to the ground and democratic institutions. But track the arc of their narrative.
Mm.
How have they changed over time? It is the only variable difference is Trump in the White House. So take Trump out of it. Look at everybody's point of view. Really, the
Yeah.
variable is the Trump administration and their actions. And you and I have had this conversation many times. If you
Mhm.
want to look at facts on the ground and policy and the salience of these things, it is important to be apolitical or at least agnostic about it. What's done well? Who said what? What are we doing? And I appreciate the opportunity to speak about it in those ways without having to, put on my political party hat or
Yeah.
or any
Yeah.
such, any such positionality. If I had been on every Sunday morning show talking about Maduro and what a loathsome character he was from 2016 to 2020,
Yeah.
and then I popped back up there yesterday to say, oh no, this is going to destabilize South America. And all of Venezuela's neighbors are concerned about what's going to happen now. Hey, what are you missing? What you're
Yeah.
missing is a third of the population of Venezuela are refugee status across the world. One
Yeah.
third. Like, is it 3 or 5% of Venezuelans move to the United States? The
Right.
neighbors of Venezuela already know it's destabilized. They're not worried that this is going to do it. They have been braced for this for the last 20 years. They have been taking in this like refugee flow for the past 20 years because, as we know, the people of Venezuela didn't have food, they don't have medicine, they don't have opportunity. And I just don't understand these claims like this is turning into a failed state. It is already a failed state.
Yeah,
Here's
yeah.
the news. It's a failed state.
It's a failed state. That's exactly right. And it's not always our business. In this case, is it our business?
So we had a conversation prior about nation building versus state building. My
Yes.
opinion, this is a state build.
Okay.
The nation of Venezuela has a lot of cohesion. Look at their refugee populations, their immigration, how immigrant flows stick together. They
Yeah.
are a proud nation rallied around a flag. It isn't some of those like tribal cobbling together of an artificial um, nation.
Mhm.
There's a lot of cohesion across Venezuela. In my opinion, this is a state build,
Okay.
restoring the capacity of the state of Venezuela so that income from their just glorious amounts of natural resources, oil, rare minerals, gold, the valuation of their naturally held resources can be restored to the people of Venezuela. As Rubio said yesterday, we're going to run policy. We're not going to run Venezuela. We're going to run policy. And I think that's different. I think the focus is a state build, restoring state
Yeah.
capacity. So is it our business?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it our
We've
business?
made it. We've made it our business.
It is
We
now,
made it our
right? Yeah.
business. We made it our business on Saturday, and I
Mm.
just happened to stay up late, and I had logged onto X, and I was like, "Oh no, this is like the season finale of Maduro." I happened to catch.
Mm.
I didn't realize this was happening, and holy smokes, it was wrapped up in 88 minutes or something, and so it was pretty astonishing. But that is what made it our business.
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
the intervention. So all of the deployments around the Caribbean and the encirclement of the state and controlling illicit oil, supply in and out, that's been one thing. But again, to
Yeah.
black bag a leader,
Yeah.
ooh, we
There's
made it our business.
we did. We did. And we'll see. There's a lot of bluster, I guess I would say, from the Trump administration about who's next, what's next, that kind of thing. And maybe some of that is viable and following up. Maybe some of it is just communication directly to, for example, Cuba, and saying, "Hey, you're next," kind of thing. And maybe they are. The president took a little jab at Greenland, and said, "I'm not going to talk about Greenland, but of course Greenland should be us, and NATO and Europe should want it to be us." So some of that stuff. Do you think that stuff helps? Do you when he freestyles and talks about these things? And look, he gets to say what he wants. He's the president, right? And he gets to set his policy. And if he wants to use that platform to say, "Pay attention, Cuba," that kind of thing. Is that helping or does that hurt? I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it takes the American population a long time to process the things that have been said and the
Okay.
reaction to the things that he says. It's just as hyperbolic the 10th time as it was the first time, which is astonishes me. And the
Yeah.
same thing for allies and other nations around the world. The Greenland thing picked up just as much momentum across European allies as Venezuela. And lots of statements about Greenland when really he seemed to be freestyling, as you said, like
Mhm.
Greenland added a dog sled to enhance their defense this
Right.
past, recently,
Yeah.
a dog sled. And he's like, no, I'm not kidding. So did they
Yeah.
add a dog sled? People react to this, and I just think they're missing the wrong. I think they're missing the point, and that is
Mm.
the Monroe Doctrine and securing the Western Hemisphere is of paramount importance. Cuba, experts will tell you, is dependent on Venezuelan money, and there's not going to be any money. So how are they going to survive? There's
Yeah.
no industry and there's no trade. They're propped up by Venezuelan money. So if you pull this out, what is their future? What are their prospects? And looking at the Cuban intelligence apparatus in Venezuela, I think that was news to many people. Understanding that
Yeah.
Hezbollah operates in Venezuela is news to many people. And the nexus of all the evil empires, if you will, Iran, China, Russia,
Yeah.
well as some of those more nefarious, like non-state actors. As I mentioned, Hezbollah operating in Venezuela. I think this is news to people.
Yeah. Yeah. They don't like that. One of the things we've learned about Donald Trump is when he says things like this, they spied on my campaign all the way back to the very beginning. Oh, wait, they did. And I'm no Trump fan, but he continues to be right because people continue to do these things. And so again, I don't want to make this a Donald Trump is a great show, but yeah, we're struggling to keep up with what was going on. If you recall, I think it was during the second election when he was talking about coyotes, and a lot of his critics thought he actually meant dogs, like
Mm.
coyotes, instead of the actual people who traffic. By the way, funded by the very same money he's going after. So when I look at the policy side of this, I see someone who says, "I'm going to sworn to protect Americans. I'm going to do it. I'm going to go after these cartels." And we certainly have the military capacity, as we saw just the other day, to put the hurting on these illegal terrorist organizations. There is a cost for that, though. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are. Look, it's one thing to say, oh, it's all not going to work. And maybe none of it works. Maybe it all goes perfect. Probably in the middle somewhere is what's going to happen. What are your legitimate concerns about this operation and what comes from it 5, 10 years from now?
Hmm, that's a fair question. Top of mind, I didn't have any long-term concerns. It seemed
Okay.
to me to have a specific focus, like explicit in how it was explained, that the the wealth of Venezuela should be returned to Venezuelans and not be spent in these malicious, malign ways across the globe, funding terror and destabilizing not only the Western Hemisphere, but its tentacles into the Middle East, like cutting off not just drug flows, the human trafficking. Like, speak to people in the Caribbean, Aruba, Trinidad, Tobago. They're like, we're miles off the coast of Venezuela. This is where human trafficking comes through. This is a real problem. And if you read the superseding indictment of Maduro, you can see very explicitly how he used state apparatus to infiltrate Western countries, the United States in particular, using diplomatic cover for drugs, people, and operations. And it is grotesque. So in the long term, removing all of those variables, I have a hard time seeing how it worsens our position. And one one like pretty prominent complaint about this was this emboldens China to take Taiwan. And I would argue that the China Taiwan question is neither mitigated or accelerated by these actions. China
Mhm.
is going to continue to do what's in the interest of China. I don't feel like international law constrains Chinese behavior in any shape or form, and I don't think there's motivation to be had from this kind of action. So again, international law doesn't constrain China. That's the bumper sticker of that.
Yeah.
But my
Yeah.
long term, could it get worse for Venezuela?
Mm. Yeah.
Sure, sure it could. I think if you ask Venezuelans, they can't imagine how it could be worse than what they are experiencing.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Tylenol is like a month's salary. Women haven't had hygiene products, back to one of our favorite topics. They haven't had it in like
Yes.
5 or 7 years. There is no supply in the stores of basic things. And did I already mention, didn't they eat the zoo animals? Like,
Yeah.
this is destitution. This is starvation. This is deprivation. A criminal syndicate running a nation. So can it get worse? Yeah. I think my takeaway is I hate to envision how.
Yeah. 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 It's hmm. Okay. We made it our business. We have this problem of the perception of what Donald Trump is going to do versus the right thing and everything. So I'm glad we covered those things. What else is on your mind specifically? You let me take a couple whacks at you, but where do you want to take this conversation?
I would like to talk about like what is possible with Venezuela. It
Okay.
used to be the wealthiest country in South America when it was more democratically oriented. And look at the countries that have pivoted to a full democratic orientation. Argentina, for
Mm,
instance, El Salvador, for instance, and really focusing on stabilizing their economy, building state institutions, having transparent but strong governance, and focusing on like resolving housing, crime, and industry. Like these are
mm,
success stories. Venezuela already had that. Like from the 19th century forward, as they like consolidated around some of these like strongman populations and built their state and bureaucracy emerged, like they were so incredibly wealthy and glamorous. It's not like they have to envision what that would look like. They already had that. They can get back to that. 25 years in the history of a nation is sad and unfortunate, but it isn't irreversible. I think there's a lot of potential for Venezuela. And if you listen to administration officials explain how they want to get money flowing again from oil and from natural resources back into Venezuela instead of funding Cuba and
yeah.
nefarious actors of the globe, I think that's important. Bringing back money to the population who rightfully deserves it. I am very optimistic about that. I
Yeah, me too.
think there's a chain of events, though, a sequence of events that will unfold, that will continue to realign. I think Mexico has a situation. They're also an oil exporter. They have old infrastructure. They are riddled with criminal cartel activity, and that will be interesting to hear Trump talk about Claudia Sheinbaum. He is always very complimentary. She's a nice woman. He likes her. He wants to do business with her. He doesn't believe her to be autonomous. He believes her to be under cartel control and would help her if she would allow it. But I think that's difficult. I think Canada is in a world of hurt with their oil industry. They were kind of a principal supplier after Venezuela, went offline and didn't supply to us anymore. They had this whole year to make a deal. Mark Carney just didn't do the deal. He didn't do the deal, and Canada's gonna just take their flowers for holding out, I guess. Is there a prize for not making a deal? But Canada is really the last one to the table, and I think they're going to be hurt significantly by the free flow realignment of oil. So I don't know. We could talk about any of those things.
My buddy Jason DeBillis has made a couple comments too. He was talking about the legal requirement, why the U.S. believes they can do this, and we covered that yesterday a little bit with Ken Rock and I when we were talking about the if you've got a warrant and the judge on their rights, you are commanded to, right? And so that's our court system saying go and arrest these people. Now that a warrant may not be used, but the court is saying you're commanded to go do it. And so there's the authority, and we've deployed people to a lot of places for a long time on similar authority. So I'll just throw that because I don't want to just derail what we're talking about. But you were
I
talking
think that,
about that. Yeah, go ahead.
well, you didn't derail it. I think you made a fair point, and I'm not a legal scholar, so I'm going to be careful. But a high level
Yeah.
understanding is because Maduro is not the accepted legitimate leader of a nation, the protections of state sovereignty are different. He's not a sitting president. He is a
Right.
usurper who is in the palace, but he doesn't hold that title, and the legal framework around that and his protection is
Mm,
different. And there's a whole other long list of legal theories which allow for this sort of arrest. And I think the Trump administration has been very careful to telegraph what they believe their legal justification is, to say this was a law enforcement action. Department of War supported a law enforcement action. And I think that is intrinsic to the messaging that they've put out
sure.
there. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I saw Jason's comment to say what's going to be had in discovery. I think it's going to be fascinating. What Maduro
Yeah.
knows about the whole long list of operations, I think
Yeah.
is fascinating, and everybody's with the popcorn waiting to see what happens. And what's so different about this and maybe other operations is he was arrested and alive.
Yeah.
And other sorts of ops was never the opportunity. So it's up to Maduro to have the conversation,
Yeah.
to start singing, if you will, about what he knows, when he knew it, and everyone else involved. And that could be very fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. He may also go Saddam and start waving his arms and talking about the right to do this before they throw a rope around his neck. I mean, Saddam made a lot of, he was barking a lot and had some points. Who gave you the right to do this kind of thing? So we'll definitely find that out. The Maduro thing is interesting in terms of, okay, so the flow of oil, and the way the Don Roe,
John Rowe. Yeah, I
so
know. I was like,
it's hard. Sometimes it's like, come on, man, just calm down here. Okay, so, but when the president, our president, impacts foreign policy around, I wonder when we see a bit of a changing of the tide of how South America is governing itself. Well, do you think we'll see more? I guess we'll say right leaning policies. Is that part of the world going to follow? Is they're like, hey, America's going to go this way, we're going to emulate that, and their populations are like, yeah, you know what? We see the resurgence potential for Venezuela. By the way, did you? This is a different thing. Did you see the press conference that they had down in Florida with a bunch of the Latin American representation that was down there? I forget the senator's name, but they had a bunch of guys down there talking, and they were all doing part of it in Spanish, and they were passionate. Is probably the best way to say it. They were looking forward to it, and it seemed like they wanted more of this in other places because Florida has a huge other place. I mean, there's so many. They have multiple diasporas, and so Venezuela for sure is one of them. You mentioned Trinidad. I mean, how many folks from Trinidad Tobago live in Florida? I saw a lot of people excited in a positive way. Now, these are folks that have influence here in the United States, but if you want to rebuild Venezuela, one of the things I know is that all of those people have to risk everything to go out, and not just their wealth, but it is going to be dangerous at times for these folks. So I do worry about that. How do we protect? Do we have a responsibility to protect these folks as they return back to their country? And by the way, when you mentioned that, I'm all over the place right now. When you mentioned the population, a lot of them being abroad, a lot of them are in the dirt forever because of that administration and how dangerous Venezuela became too. So there's plenty of stuff for you to work on there. Please fire away.
if you look at immigrant stories about what they experienced in Venezuela over the past 2 decades, everything that they had was confiscated by the state. So any privately held property, inventory, land, all of that was confiscated, in almost a Zimbabwe type fashion, and used to enrich just a very small class of elites, including Maduro, Rodriguez, who's the VP. There's just a real consolidation of access and opportunity, and to control the population, which resulted in these like outflows of the third. Like I think that's 9 million people. I think that's more than Syria. I think it's the largest immigration flow of any state in modern history. Um, like the subjugation of this people and the depravity of the regime
Yeah.
is unmatched in so many ways. So to allow for the escape and then the return of immigration, what policies allow for a safe return and a
Mm.
restoration of the state? I think that should be the focus. In my opinion and my experience and exposure, Venezuelans want to return to Venezuela, to the Venezuela that they know before
Mm.
before Chavez and Maduro. And I think if I had to make a case as to why the Chavez mausoleum was bombed as part of this operation, symbolic.
Mm. Yeah.
I don't know who was in the, the op center to be like, a good target.
Yeah.
It'd be like
Yeah.
Lenin's tomb. It's Lenin's tomb, or it's any other tomb. Let's get that one too. I think it's
Yeah.
poignant.
Yeah. And probably I would bet that Marco Rubio's experience growing up, his folks and everything else informs him to like, I know the right, and he's from Florida for crying out loud. He knows the right Venezuelan to talk to, and I imagine there was some listening that happened. Why don't you guys do this too? This will show the people that they have a chance. Because one of the challenges with all these kind of big things is the people expect everything else to fail them. It's like the part of the homeless process is getting someone to believe not only in themselves but in the system around them that it's not going to fail. And so, yeah, there's some messaging that goes on there. I guess the last thing before I hand it back over to you, when we think about the challenges of this, and again, the Latin American representation, it's like, hey, we're next. Please take out our bad person. There's only so much of this we can do. It is very, very hard to get right. The military operations side is one thing because that's controllable and we understand it
Mhm.
and everything else. But state building, not a gentle process. It is hard, and it's gonna be fraught with errors and walking backwards for a while, sometimes sideways, and administrations change, and all of a sudden this thing can be 20 years down the road and be a mess. I hope that that's not the case, but that's certainly possible. So, how many of these cans of worms do we dare open?
The one thing Rubio said, back to him being the best Secretary of State all time, like I'm more convinced than ever. But he
Mm,
explained that people continue to look at Venezuela with this old lens, this 2001 to 2016 lens, and it's not the Middle
mhm.
East, doesn't have the same types of challenges or fragmentation, and also it's not a faraway land. So to quit looking at it in that way, this is a different sort of game. The business side of me believes there's a business case for all countries, and the solution lies in that. So enterprise and capitalism and providing opportunity, even from the very basics, food, medicine, and housing, starts to solve a lot. And when you can shore up those types of fundamentals, then building a state on top of that is just easier and better. But to
Yeah,
remove the money flows and the oil used for bad actors, and to sever the ties between Venezuela and Iran, pulls the pressure off of all of those other failed experiments in the Middle East as well, because how are they getting funded? Hamas, Hezbollah, the nefarious actors in Iraq, those all stem from Iran's malign influence and money flows. So, again, to cut that thread, I think is important. I also think this puts pressure on Russia. I think this cuts a lot of pipeline, again, money,
mhm.
supplies, oil flow. I think it'll be
Yeah,
really interesting to see the alignment and realignment. And I don't think that you can look at this as just a single puzzle piece. I think there's a mosaic here. But one thing that I've seen in a lot of immigrant populations and expert opinions is there's a saying, and I won't say it in Spanish, is the way to Havana is via Caracas.
hmm
Like,
hmm
so this Cuban pressure in the Western Hemisphere that JFK was fighting and many presidents have found challenging is linked via Caracas. And I think we'll just see a lot of unraveling of some of the thorniest issues of our
yeah,
time when when you cut when you cut the money flow. That's
mm,
really the bottom line. You cut the money flow, you cut the act and the oil, and Shahid drones operating and being produced in Venezuela by Iran. Like,
hmm
I think this is what most people don't understand is how intertwined it is. This isn't the game of Risk where it's just so contained in a single geography and there's no reach. It's just so embedded everywhere and across. You have to start snipping these threads.
yeah. Folks that smuggle are smart. They survive smuggling because they're good at it, because they're smart. And one of the things that Venezuela, among other countries, does is they are a stepping stone into the United States for whatever purposes. We'll just worry about the nefarious ones. But it's very possible for someone to go into the right shop in Syria or in whatever place you want to pick, Libya, any place that's aligned with Venezuela to get the proper paperwork to enter into the US. Now, that's a little tougher than it was before, but this has gone on for a long time where, of course, your adversary is trying to figure out how do we penetrate. Well, we know how to smuggle. We can smuggle drugs. We can smuggle anything. We can smuggle people for sure. And so you start to have this influx, this pathway, this rat line, what we would call it in the intel world. And so, for sure, there's a lot of nefarious things that are coming through this state because it's run by a criminal, an internationally recognized criminal. So
Mhm.
there's that aspect of it. And I guess I'll give you some space there to talk about that.
Well, I think you make a great point, and I also like I see Jason's comment in the chat. Like, the important variable is who determines whether someone's a bad guy or not, and see Saddam. So the Iraq case is entirely separate, and I was never for an invasion of Iraq. I- uh, so I'll go on the record to say I thought that was a mistake.
Mm,
It doesn't mean that servicemen aren't heroic. I love the US military. So I really want to keep those things separate. The political consideration, the military consideration, and how that was prosecuted, that war was prosecuted, that's a whole different thing.
yeah,
Saddam, uh, again, I just don't agree with how any of that was conducted. If
yeah,
he had been black bagged and brought to a court after a grand jury and superseding indictment with a trail of all of his criminality, that would be different than removing all Ba'athist Party members, toppling a regime,
yeah,
arming, one faction over another, and completely destabilizing an entire country. That's different than arresting Nicholas and Cecilia in the night. So
yeah,
I want to be clear on what I perceive the scope of this operation to be, and the goals versus Iraq, which from the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the deciding of its borders and the establishment of that as a country was a problem from the first day. So the break it, you buy it paradigm, it's a mess, an absolute mess. I'm
yeah,
gonna I'm gonna step back from that. The Middle East isn't my area.
yeah. Oh, I want to jump
What?
in.
Okay, you jump in because
I'm going to jump in.
I didn't like
Well,
it, and
yeah, yeah,
and I see this as being a different consideration.
yeah. One thing I will say is that our government, doesn't matter if it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden or Barack Obama or George Bush the younger, our government, how it works, our playbook that we put in play is illiterate, dumb, offensive. We get shit wrong at a rate that is unsustainable. We talked last episode about how we create instability wherever we go, and this is what we're talking about here. So when we go to Iraq, and I'll just use a very simple example. It's not meant to be perfect. Just illustration. If someone was to, a foreign country was to come in and topple Donald Trump, everybody like, yeah, that's great. And then they put in charge someone who has no, like, we've never heard of before from the black community and said, here you go, have all the power. You're the person in charge now. By the way, we're going to design a new flag for the United States. Us, the foreign country, is going to go, here's your new flag, right? That's kind of
Mhm,
what it sounds crazy to have someone say that.
mhm,
You're going to come in and put someone in power and you're going to do this and you're going to force us to have elections. Well, the people that lost the power were, you know, they were going to be upset every single time. So the Sunnis are like, no, we're not doing this. And when the elections happened, they said, all right, now we're fighting because you think you had an election, but we're going to settle this with blood. And that's a lot of what happened. And then just the ground level stuff. So all of these things go into this mix of stuff that I know I'm concerned about. I'm very skeptical about the future. Yes, there's a lot of money. Yes, there's a lot of smart people. We are talking a state as opposed to a whole nation kind of stand up off the ground. But yeah, those those lessons, until we prove otherwise, those lessons should apply. But different sets. Different. Here's the thing I was always told, Amber, and I think you can appreciate this. When I was working in Iraq, I'm like, I need to get to Afghanistan to go see that fight. And so when I got there, and before I was on the way, oh, it's different, it's different, it's different. And I'm like, okay, but we're not different. So I'm hoping that we are different this time, and that we don't create more problems than we can sustain. Now, is the State Department better? Maybe right now, but how long will that last? How long? Rubio is only going to be Secretary of State for so long, and it will no longer be his vision as soon as the next person steps up, whether that person is picked by a Republican president or a Democratic president. We're going to have change at a rate that makes it hard to sustain growth in a way that's positive. So says Pete.
So I think you make a great point in propping up propping up a leader who isn't accepted, known, or already has consensus. But one thing I saw in Venezuela already is that Maria Machado,
Mm-hmm.
the woman who is the opposition leader who won the Nobel Peace Prize. She isn't being asked to run Venezuela. And the comments were like, she doesn't have the support. Now, if you look at their election, she would have won, but she was banned from running. She had to flee, and her successor did win. They're not putting him up for it yet either because of the state control and the apparatus and the support. So while people may want that, what keeps the state operational, I think, is a lesson learned from Iraq. Don't topple all of the infrastructure. You have to keep the
Nice.
lights on. You have to keep people in place to run the state. I think that is a lesson learned, whether that's been explicitly detailed or not. When Trump said like she doesn't have the support, I don't believe that to mean she doesn't have popular support.
Mm.
I believe that to mean
Mhm.
she doesn't have institutional, state, military, like bureaucratic support. Like, go ahead and put her in the palace, but if no one listens to her, then the real coup is taking out Maria Machado. Then that's something else. So to have this like power play between the three parties that the Trump administration has been working with to try and see like who could assume a leadership role and run Venezuela in a democratic transition until a real like another election can take place. I think it's been decided the VP would assume power. She and her brother, I think he's head of the National Congress or something. I think that's been decided because they have the institutional support and can keep the lights on. And again, to tidy that up, I'd say I think that's the lesson learned from Iraq. You can't just go in and wrap up everybody and leave
Yeah.
no one in charge. Leave no one in charge.
Yeah, fair enough. We were kind of getting there before, but I want to get back to this. So Canada, benefited from the situation that was previous to Saturday. China was benefiting from it. Iran was benefiting from it. This gives if they choose to use it properly, this gives the Trump administration a longer lever now. They've got control over an asset, and the folks that had it before don't have it. And so now that those benefits are going to be, it's going to be competition for that, Amber. And what do you think that means? And that's just the oil side of this, right? And I guess I'll throw one more thing about the oil thing. We're losing our minds about Citgo or whoever it's going to be and how they're going to benefit. And we get so angry at the folks who do well in business, especially the business of processing dirt and oil into money. Why do we struggle with that as well? So I guess when we look at the money calculation and the foreign influence that the president has created abroad, not just in Venezuela, what are your thoughts?
Well, gas and oil companies were already operating in Venezuela just the same way they were operating in Iraq and all across the globe since oil was discovered. So the
Yep.
seizure of those assets by Venezuela, the nationalization of the industry, and then the last 25 years of no infrastructure update, and they're operating at like 8% capacity or something because of the like
Yeah.
dilapidation. Like, why? I don't understand this complaint. They were
Mm,
already there. So
right.
should a legal process be enacted to allow for the return of these companies to the land that they had leased or had otherwise rights to um, create efficiencies, upgrades in the infrastructure and the processing of the heavy crude, which is Venezuela's supply, and Louisiana process the heavy crude, which they have this like special expertise in. Yes. Does it have to go to China or anywhere else? No. And I think if you watch on some of the Sunday morning talk shows, Kristen Welker's like, why do we need it? And Rubio was like, why does China need it? Why does everyone
Right.
else need it? Like, where's the performative impetus here to say we don't, the United States shouldn't have any role in oil. We shouldn't have successful businesses. We should just let everybody else nab up resources across the globe and process rare minerals dirtily in their land. We're going to have nothing. We're not going to have magnets. Like, I don't understand this worldview. So You might need to get a different guest to help you understand this worldview because I don't understand it.
Yeah,
I don't understand the self-sabotage. I don't
yeah,
understand the hands off Venezuela marches or why everyone else should be allowed to operate with impunity in the Western Hemisphere or even globally to fund bad actors.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. The other
anyway,
thing is the war for oil trope. It's a trope. It's a trope for a reason because it's something that you bring out and you shake the stick with the oil thing on it. Ah, no war for oil. But when we went to Iraq, we had an open competition for who got to compete for that oil, and other countries came in and did that, and maybe to their benefit, maybe not. Who knows? But every time I hear that, I'm like, what are we talking about here? Of course, oil is a very important thing. It improves any economy that it goes to. It's a miracle. So I don't understand why we get so. But that's why I asked him, like, maybe you had some concept of why it is. But I just kind of dismiss it when I hear people say that. It's probably not fair to those people, but that's the best I've got because I just don't know why do you want to kneecap your economy? Why we're not running around the world knocking people on the head and taking their oil either. I mean, that's not what happens. Hopefully, that isn't what happens here. That would surprise me if it did. I think that's unexpected. Rather than say no war for oil, it's like no, let's make sure the Venezuelans get the benefits. It's like the Guianans next door. Those folks were being thugged by the Venezuelans, because they have oil and they were going to be doing some real heavy competition over what's there and who belongs to what. Now we have a chance to not have that conflict too, and you can't prove a negative in this case, but very good chance there would have been a lot of death and fighting over Guyana's newly found oil reserves.
I think you make a good point. There are a lot of comments out there that this is all about the oil, and I would push back and say it isn't. It's part of it, but it isn't. It's not about possessing the oil. It's about what is the oil revenue used for? What does it fund? Is it enriching the lives of Venezuelans? And it is not. And they are first in line to benefit from this abundance of riches. And that has been taken from them by their leadership for the past 25 years. To be so rich in resources of oil, gold, minerals, and be starving
Yeah,
is wholly unacceptable. That's not to say I think we should be first in line to go in and remedy that, but it is wholly unacceptable. And the international global sentiment has been for a long time Maduro is an illicit leader who steals from his people, and this is a problem.
yeah,
So to restore any kind of revenue to the Venezuelan people, I think is important and a key consideration. Now, of course, there's going to be mistakes made. I think every single administration makes tons of mistakes and some more than others, but leadership is tricky, governance is trickier, and getting
yeah,
others to do the right and correct thing is always subject to interpretation. I'll look at our European allies again.
yeah,
First thing out they're doing is they're monitoring the situation, just like monitoring Ukraine. And we're with you as long as it takes, dear Vladimir, but they're not doing anything. However, they want more missiles and Patriot, and they want more deployment of resources on their territory, but are apoplectic over the armada around Venezuela. Why is that?
yeah, yeah,
What is the difference? I think there's some inconsistency and some hypocrisy there to say, no, we want it all to come this direction. We want our allyship and our alliances to be here only. Venezuela is an outlier, and we're going to monitor the situation. I just think there's some inconsistencies in global sentiment and policy altogether.
Hmm. Yeah. It is a complex situation. I don't mind people struggling with it because these things are not straightforward and they are fraught with errors. And again, we change our mind about what we're going to do next constantly. Sometimes we're a great partner, and other times, gosh, we're crazy. And but if not us, who else is going to allow? I mean, certainly Europe is not going to come over and free the Venezuelan people. So I guess when do you actually get? This is my question. Does Donald Trump get to say, "I am the liberator of Venezuela"? My administration did that. I know he'll say it now, but when is it actually achieved?
I think people think it's Marco Rubio.
Okay.
The meme war has shown Rubio in like a Napoleonic sort of like sash, and he's now taken on the viceroyship of Venezuela as one of his jobs, on top of being the national archivist and all the other jobs. So I think that the sentiment, the affinity is for Rubio. In my
Mm,
in my
okay.
opinion, that's what I've seen in these populations. And I want to be really careful and just explain to your audiences that when I make decisions about what's appropriate or how I feel about an issue, I really go to the ground to say, who are the stakeholders in this, which are the
Yeah.
Venezuelans. It isn't up to me to say how to feel about it on the ground in Venezuela. If Venezuelans are delighted at this action and they have had hope restored and optimism, and they believe the future is brighter because of this action, that is for them. I'm not here
Mm,
to take that from them. If they feel like this is hope and they have felt it for the first time in more than 2 decades, I'm so thrilled for to for people to feel that way. Because my underlying like first operating principle is people should have a homeland free from incursion, invasion. I want sovereignty and stability for all. I really do. Ukraine
yeah.
to Venezuela, that is what I'd like. Now, it is a messy process to get there. It's
It
very
is.
messy. The United States went through that same thing. Very messy. I don't know if you watched the newest Ken Burns documentary about the founding of the nation. Messy.
Yeah. To
Messy,
say the least. Yes. Yes, it
to say
was.
the least. But
Yeah. Yeah. We often lose sight of this when we try to go and do these wonderful things. We lose sight of how hard it was, how long it took for us women to have a checking account. And so the pace of these things can't be ours, it's got to be theirs. And when you talk about that ground truth, I'm all about that. What do they need, what do they want, what are the problems that they don't need our help with? That's one of the things I gave to my commanders all the time when I talk to them is what's the smallest thing we can do today? What are the problems that you don't need our help with? How are we in your way? And I'll tell you, it was endless the ways they wanted to do for themselves. And you don't just ask that, like, how are you going to do that? And then they would say, oh, it's me and Dave and Bob. We're going to go out and we're going to fix this. Can I come back when you have it done? Can I come take a look at it? Yeah, you can. But what we didn't need, and those were wins that were handed to us, but they were invisible because we never thought to look for them. We were looking for things that were 50 years down the road, 20 years, so far down the road, you couldn't plan for it. We don't like that slow, steady, small progress. We don't like to see those wins. We don't like to look for them. And that caused us a lot of problems in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other places that we've been to. Will we do the same thing here? I don't know. But we don't need to
no,
give that Venezuela that much help. Please.
no, I think you make a good point. So I listened to this interview from Maria Corina Machado recently where she explained how she documented her the win of her colleague at Mundo. I forget his name. She's
Uh,
definitely more known. But the man that subbed in for her in the election, how they grassrooted this operation to document all the poll results, to get those photographed, to get those exported so that the world knew who actually won the election. They had to smuggle in laptops and phones and Starlink in order to have transparency. Like they already have an idea of how they want to operate. They just need to not be murdered and imprisoned and have they need to have food. I think there is a sentiment there, and they're ready to go as soon as you lift the oppression of the regime from over the top of them. And if anyone wants to listen to this interview, it was on the All In podcast. David Freeberg interviewed Maria Corina Machado, excellent, and also her Nobel Peace Prize acceptance speech, really excellent. And I think she loves Venezuela, but she has been operating behind the shadows with a lot of persecution for a long time. And I think she is representative of a whole population who feels the same way. So
yeah.
instead of hands off Venezuela, I think eyes on Venezuela, and how can we continue to support the efforts of what the people say that they want, that's where I would come down on like my final verdict. How can I be
Mhm.
supportive of what Venezuelans want for Venezuela?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that's and it doesn't get to be comfortable. When you ask for that, it's like, "Hey, this is what that's gonna be," and then you have to go, "Okay, okay, okay," it's otherwise you're gonna get out in front of the Venezuelans again. That their way is gonna be their way, and their ability to fail is gonna be their ability to fail. Here's the link, everybody, for the All In podcast episode that Amber just referenced. To be right there, and it's in the comments, hopefully in Facebook. I'm not sure if it'll show up or not, but look, I've had you for almost an hour already. What do you want to wrap up with? What? And thanks for coming on and talking about this in such a sane and calm way. We don't all got to agree, but I think you've given us a way to look at this that we can all at least say that's reasonable and rational. By the way, you're an expert, so keep on talking.
Uh, an expert on some things. I try and be pretty clear on what my expertise is, and
Fair
I
enough.
feel
Yes.
like leadership and diplomacy and those types of considerations are my area. I don't want to pretend to your listeners I'm a subject matter expert in all things. I'll tell you
Sure.
pretty clearly, like, Middle East, let me
Yeah.
back out of some of those thornier questions. I definitely back out of questions around China. Again, leadership and diplomacy and taking action. What is leadership decision making, and what does diplomacy look like?
Hmm.
How do you do
Hmm.
that? So if I were to be handed a set of global problems that I needed to take action on, what would my report card end up looking like?
Mm.
Human fallibility is always part of the consideration. And I think this like turbocharged hyper political environment that we live in brings out, haters and supporters all at the same time. And
Yeah.
I just really like coming on your show to break it down to these core
Yeah.
issues. What do we know? When do we know it? What do we think about that? Let's analyze that. Can I read more? Can I do more? Can I know more?
Yeah.
It's the same thing I tell my students. Like, what do you know about that, and when did you know it?
Yeah.
Let's figure that out so you can arrive at some conclusions without hot takes. So thanks
Yeah.
for always letting me talk about my not hot take.
Yeah. Wait, and just since I've talked to a lot of people about a lot of things, and I primarily, if I'm best, I'm primarily listening, and trying to understand these things. And one thing, I come from a town that has an oil refinery in it, and I've learned a lot about the oil business. And these aren't evil people. These are people that want there to be good things for people, and the people that work there, they thrive. And if Venezuela has any ability to get that machine running again, there'll be plenty of wealth. I don't know anybody who works in the oil industry who's broke. They all make good money. And yeah, I have a lot of hope that Venezuela will be able to rebound. And it's not going to happen in 6 months. It's not. It's going to take some time, and there's going to be some mistakes. So, all right. Well,
For
unless
sure.
you have anything else to say, let's wrap it up. But thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate you having this really calm and informative conversation with me.
Calm and informative is my favorite type. All right. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you, everybody. I'll see you all actually later on today, and I'll say goodbye to you in a second, Amber. Bye bye, everybody. See you in a little bit.